So welcome, everybody. I'm so thankful that all of you decided to spend some time with me today. My name is Tim Huff, and I'm from TurkNet Leadership Group. And we're going to talk about something that I've been thinking about for a long time. It's about meeting management. And I was thinking about this concept not too long ago, and the amount of time that we all spend in meetings and just how much energy it can either sap from us or it can put inside us to really help us be efficient and effective in the course of our daily jobs. And I came up with, as I was thinking through this, what I'm referring to as the 7 deadly sins of meeting management. And I hope you find some good value out of this. Quickly, by way of introduction, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tim Huff. I am the Vice President of Leadership Development for a company called TurkNet Leadership Group. TurkNet Leadership Group is based here in Tucker, Georgia. Been around in the greater Atlanta area for north of 3 decades. Executive coaching and leadership development is our bread and butter. We have clients in 39 plus states and a couple of countries in Europe, continuing to grow and to be a solid force in developing leaders. The way I look at it, we'd like to make leaders better leaders and bosses better bosses. I've been associated with TurkNet for quite a while, but I joined them officially in my full-time capacity just recently. So again, to continue my introduction of myself, you see some logos on there. Quick story of how I came to be where I am now. I started out my career in the United States Army. I was an infantry officer for a while, and I had a lot of fun, did a lot of great, wonderful things. Did a couple of deployments to a couple countries that had a lot of brown in their terrain. About a little north of 2 decades ago, I decided I wanted something different for myself and my family. So I kicked off my second career journey, and that was as an IT leader. So I joined the Walt Disney Company down in Orlando, Florida, spent 10 years with them in increasing levels of responsibility, leading IT teams down there. And then about a little north of a decade ago, I came up here to the Atlanta area and I joined the Macy's IT team just outside of Atlanta in Johns Creek, Georgia. Spent about 3, 4, 5-ish years with Macy's. Had a great time. They're a great team. But then I joined an organization called CRH, which is one of the global leading manufacturers of concrete, cement, aggregates, things like that, as part of the IT executive team there. Spent just shy of 4 years there. And then I joined a company called Owens & Minor, based out of Richmond, Virginia, the manufacturing arm of Owens & Minor, based out of Alpharetta, Georgia, just down the street from where I live. And I was leading up the IT team there. In the past several years, I fell in love with this whole concept of executive coaching and leadership development. So I went to some classes, got some certifications, and created a little side business called Platinum Level Leadership that I just recently folded into TurkNet Leadership Group as I joined full-time here. To round out my introduction here, there's one thing that I say that all of these logos and all of these organizations have in common. And I'd say that I've been pretty careful about crafting my career accordingly. All of these organizations are one of the, if not the best in the world at what they do. And I'm very fortunate to be part of an organization now, TurkNet Leadership Group, that is one of the best at what we do in the entire world, I would say. Okay, so with that, what we are going to talk about today, the goals for today, I've got 2 goals that I want to accomplish here. I'd like for us to recognize some of the common meeting dysfunctions that I'm referring to as sins, that we see pretty much every day in our existence, in our professional lives, and sometimes our personal lives. And then also talk about some best practices for planning, facilitating, and optimizing outstanding meetings, not just effective meetings, not just regular meetings that we can go to and not see sins, but outstanding meetings where you really harness the energy and all of the value that everybody can bring to a meeting. So those are my 2 goals today. So how are we structuring this? So the first thing that we're going to talk about is stories about the worst meetings that you've been a part of. So right after this, I'm going to be asking for 1 or 2 volunteers to briefly describe in, 30 to 60 seconds, an example of a really bad meeting that you've been a part of. And I'll share mine first. But we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to go into the sins and the tips relative to each one of these sins. And then we're going to look at it in a little bit of a different context. We're going to take some of these tips, best practices. We're going to look at things to do before a meeting, during a meeting, and after a meeting that can be truly effective. So those are the things we're going to be talking about here, and then we'll wrap up. So first off, a question for everybody that I'd like for you to think about and share with the group here, and I'll start off. what's an example of the worst meeting that you've ever been a part of, either the worst structure of a meeting or a single instance here? If you do have an example, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you and we'll have a conversation about it. But first I'll share mine. And the one that I've got a lot of examples, and it was a little bit difficult to narrow it down to one, but I think the one that probably takes the cake as the worst meeting that I've ever been to. This was early on in my career while I was in the military. We were doing some training exercises in the desert in California. Very, very intense. We were doing live maneuver drills and things like that. So we had just completed one of our missions. We were just absolutely exhausted. The entire unit. We hadn't slept in days, hadn't eaten in a long time. We were just ready to fall over asleep. And right as we concluded a particular training event, the organization that was putting this whole thing on decided that was the right time to take everybody, put them in a room and talk about the things that we did bad. And as you can imagine, we were just absolutely exhausted. It was just a really, really tough time for everybody. They put us in this room, if you can imagine, like a shipping container, a couple of those deep and a couple wide. It was at least 195 degrees in there. It was just absolutely horrible. We had these little teeny tiny seats. We were all in our battle gear and we were huddled together about like this, sweltering heat, just ready to collapse on each other. And we stayed there for a good solid 2 hours while they talked about all of the bad things that we did and the mistakes that we made. And we walked out of that meeting thinking there is absolutely nothing I got out of that other than being more tired and more frustrated. So that was the worst meeting I've ever been in. So somebody raise your hand and share with us one of the worst meeting experiences that you have had, either recently, professional life, personal life, without talking about names or organizations or companies or anything like that. What's an example of a bad meeting that you've been a part of? Greg.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, what's a bad meeting for yourself?
So, yeah, coming from the corporate world, bad meetings are just part of the culture. And I would say just no one meeting in particular, but meetings that are meetings just to have a meeting or meetings about having another meeting and not having an agenda, right? Those are some of the ones, there's just no purpose. There's no structure. People just want to have a meeting just to have a meeting and no real direction. Those are the kinds of meetings that you're like, man, what am I doing in here?
You hit on some of the key things that are pet peeves of mine that we're absolutely going to talk about. So Greg, thank you so much for sharing that. Completely agree. Some of those times where we're in a meeting, not really sure why we're there, what we're trying to accomplish, how we're structuring the conversation. That's a beautiful setup. By the way, I didn't prep Greg to say that, but I appreciate that setup. Let me give you an example of a pretty bad meeting. Some of you may have seen this video before, but here's about a 4-minute video on a pretty bad meeting.
Hey, I was on this date the other night, and we were at this restaurant.
All right, guys, you guys ready to get started?
Hang on a second.
Trip, you ready to get started, buddy?
Okay. Hey, you guys, we're all here. We should start.
All right, thanks for coming, guys. I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about some ideas for the marketing strategy this year. So if you got one, just throw it out there. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah. How long is this meeting supposed to last?
Oops, sorry.
The schedule wasn't exactly clear.
Should be out of here in 30.
Is that approximate or?
Hey, guys. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. I got caught in traffic.
7 minutes, actually.
What's that?
Couple is 2.
So what we're doing is we're just coming up with some ideas for our new marketing strategy.
Sure.
So, anyone?
I think we should implement Pinterest.
Oh, that's a fun idea.
What about a publicity event in the park?
Interesting. But how are you going to plan around the weather? What if it rains?
So we'll party in the rain.
Okay, just want to emphasize there's no bad ideas here. We're just brainstorming. So.
Yeah, I'm just really thinking it'll be a huge waste of money to try to plan around the weather.
Yeah, okay. We get your concerns. Nancy, thank you.
Okay, anyone else have an idea? Ephraim?
I've always wanted to see rain fall down all at once in a big splash instead of small drops over time. I mean, think how it could impact the irrigation system.
Okay. Terry?
Well, I have an idea from my previous job that I had last year. Let me take that back a little bit. I have this wonderful idea, but it doesn't really make sense unless I just take it back a second and bring it forward together. It was like 3 weeks ago that I remember he said something that I couldn't understand.
Hold on a
but I-
second, Terry. Hold on. Thanks for pointing. Here's what we need to do. Okay. Lauren, you got this? We do a video submission contest on YouTube.
Oh, that's
Okay.
been done.
It'll be on Facebook. It'll be on Pinterest. It'll be on
If
Twitter.
we do something with technology, we lose the senior demographic.
So you guys want to see an example?
Should we be moving on to the next topic? I mean, it's already quarter after.
Quarter after. That's funny.
Who knows how to put this on the screen up there? Because you're not going to be able to, I want you to see all the details. We have a cable. Does this cable work?
I think that's power.
I don't know if on the there's an
This one.
HDMI.
That cord's not gonna be long
in
enough.
the back.
Does that
there
remote
could be
go to
like
the
2 or 3,
TV?
like HDMI 1,
Plenty of time,
HDMI
guys.
2,
No rush.
HDMI
This isn't
3,
working.
I got a
and
green
they
marker.
coincide
Call the
with
IT
each
guy.
other with,
Wait,
there's
turn
also,
what off and back
what
on?
do you call it? S-video.
Hello?
Okay, I've got it working.
Hit play.
Okay, now imagine hundreds of those floating around the web. Do you want to watch it one more time?
No, please.
Trip, I think you're onto something with this idea. I really like it. Carol, did you get that down?
Yeah.
Sorry, what is C-test up sub YT pros?
Well, I'm abbreviating to make room for all these great ideas. Contest, uploading it to YouTube, funniest, and you get a prize.
Wait, where are the other ideas?
And time.
Wait, where y'all going? We still have 100% of the things to accomplish.
We are going to not be that leader. That's some of you may have seen that before. Every time I watch it, I find that just absolutely humorous. Okay, so a quick poll that I would like to get your input on. How effective are the meetings in your organization? This is a poll that I'm interested in seeing just in general, overall. Is it very productive, usually productive, hit or miss, could have been an email? How are the culture of meetings in your organization? So we have some that are usually productive, hit or miss. Interesting so far, nobody's very productive. Oh, that's interesting. And could have been an email. Okay, so about half and half on usually productive or hit or miss. Okay, interesting. Got another one for hit or miss. Okay. Yeah, my experience is about the same, that there have been some meetings that are absolutely productive. They got the right folks there. They know what we're trying to accomplish. So the unproductive time is what we're going to try to minimize and talk about, and how we can overcome some of those things in this conversation here. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the first deadly sin of ineffective meetings, the lack of purpose. By the way, these aren't necessarily in order, but they are to some degree organized in a certain way. But so lack of a purpose, without a defined purpose, like Greg was talking about earlier, participants won't know what the meeting is about and what is the determination of a definition of success. So if you can think about it, and I'm sure everybody has been in meetings where it's very clear why we're there, but then other times they kind of have an idea of the topic that we're talking about, but not really sure why we're meeting. So in my experience, most of meetings can be classified into these kinds of purposes. First off, a meeting to make a decision. You know what the topic is, you know what the background is, the people who need to be in the room to talk about this are present. The success of the meeting is a decision is made. That's one common meeting purpose, to solve a problem. Similar to a decision, you understand what the problem is, the success criteria is problem solved. Inform, this is the overwhelming majority of meetings that we probably see in our days, is all about informing other people, whether it be a project report out or some other kind of meeting where the whole purpose is just information sharing. So success is very easy. Participants informed and proven that they can that they've received the information properly. Similar to solving a problem, brainstorming ideas. There have been some meetings that I've been at where this has been an extremely productive meeting where people understand why they're there, how to go about the process of brainstorming. And if you even have 1 or 2 or 3 ideas, that is success for that meeting. That's a great meeting purpose. Or for those one-on-one meetings or some of those other meetings that are less about decisions and problems and more around professional development. Anytime where growth, guidance, mentorship, whatever that kind of body of knowledge is provided to another individual, that is success for that kind of a meeting. Okay, so that's the first one. The second deadly sin of ineffective meetings. I think Greg Osham mentioned this one as well. Missing agenda. So you have a purpose, but without an actual agenda, even an informal one, participants won't be able to be focused on the right topics for the right amount of time. And it could be something as simple as we're going to talk about this for 15 minutes and this for 15 minutes, and that's it. Whatever that agenda needs to be, as long as it's clear and people understand what we're meeting on and how to meet on them for the right amount of time, that is what we're trying to get about. So a couple things as you're preparing an agenda, some ideas, get input from the main participants. You can say, well, I want to focus on this one for 15 minutes and this for 5 minutes. What do you think? Include topics that affect all participants. Unfortunately, we're all in meetings so many times where you have 20 people in there and everybody talks about their own piece for like 4 minutes and every other topic is not even remotely relevant to everybody else. So an effective meeting, you have agenda topics that at least is some degree consistent across all of the participants. Make the most valuable topics first. This is something that I actually started to implement a couple of years ago, and it started to yield some good things. Think if you were to think about when you first start a meeting, you have everybody's attention. You've just talked about your purpose. You've just talked about how you're going to go into the agenda. You put the most valuable topic right up front and you attack that first. So if you need to adjust the agenda to really get that value out of that meeting, you put that one first, as much as practical. Ensure each topic has an owner. This is kind of obvious, but if you happen to talk about something and the purpose or the owner of that particular topic is unprepared, not ready to talk about it, probably shouldn't have it on the agenda. But ensuring that every topic has an owner is a good tip. And good practice, sending out an agenda before the meeting as part of the meeting invite is always good. What I've been trying to do every time that I put out a meeting invite, I always put in the comments section, purpose, : to do something, whatever that is. And it could be nothing more than we're going to discuss this topic and share information, something as general as that. A lot of times you don't have to put the agenda in there in the meeting invite, but if you have multiple pieces of topics that you really want to get across in this meeting, then a good practice to put the agenda in there. And don't overcommit. I know all of us have been part of those meetings where you have 30 minutes and you have 7 topics on there, and you're lucky to get through 2 of them. You know, why even have an agenda if you're going to be as overcommittal as that? Just be realistic. Think about what you truly want to accomplish. The most valuable thing up front. Spend enough time on that. Make sure everybody understands this is what we're going to talk about. But unlike the time Nazi that we just saw earlier, be flexible. Just make sure that you understand that when it's time to stretch the agenda, it's very appropriate. You know, if you're that most valuable thing, you know, we're spending 10 minutes on this, but we're already 20 minutes in. Hey, folks, I think this is a really valuable conversation. So that last part of the agenda, we're going to move that to the next meeting. Hey, Sally and Jeff, yeah, we're not going to get to your topic. So is it okay if we switch it to the next time? Topics like that or conversations like that are very, very appropriate. Not wasting people's time and making a deliberate decision to spend more time on things than other things. Okay, so the third of our deadly sin, ineffective meetings, not being prepared. Meeting facilitator, and we've all been there and I've been guilty of this sin so many times. You're fumbling around with the technology, not properly organized with the content, wasting everybody's time, trying to figure out the cord to the monitor, or not realizing how to put a piece of content out on the Zoom or the Teams meeting. And it's perfectly fine to kind of fumble around with things in the meeting as long as you're not wasting people's time and as long as it's not detracting from the purpose of the meeting and getting people to lose focus of what the conversation is about. So with that, a couple quick tips on a checklist. Is your purpose defined and is your purpose communicated? Is your agenda prepared with topic owners and is that communicated properly? And are the invites sent to the right participants? Let me spend a little bit of time on this. You know, this is one that I was thinking about putting as one of the sins, but I decided not to, and not just because I wanted to keep the number to 7, but inviting the right participants. I highly, highly recommend that you do not fall into the trap of just putting a distribution group in your required part of the meeting invite and just blindly sending it out to everybody. You could be wasting a lot of people's time by doing that. Just be very thoughtful about who you're inviting to the meeting and why. And something that I think is a great idea is be very intentional about using the required and the optional field. You know, if you want to invite somebody for the just intent of knowledge sharing or just listening in, perfectly fine to use the optional. If you can make it, great. If you can't, that's fine. But everybody that you're putting in that required, please make sure that you're inviting people deliberately, but sending out the invites to the right participants in the right amount of time, by the way. Sending out an invite two hours before a meeting is an anti-pattern. It's not the right thing to do. Pre-reads, if you send those out in advance, Matt Cattuso and I were part of an organization that we were really good about not only sending out pre-reads, but the culture of expectation that everybody looked at those pre-reads and was conversant in them before the meeting. That was a great technique, and I love that technique, making sure that you provide those in advance, that people are prepared to come to the meeting to talk about it. Is your Teams and Zoom properly set up and tested? 2 years ago, this was a big deal, as you can imagine. Nowadays, it's probably not as much of a big deal, but because everybody's so used to doing it, but always make sure that it's tested properly. Is your conference room reserved? That's going into a conference room and two people think that they have the meeting at the same time. Using the conference room technology, as a former IT person, I kind of cringe at this one and I laugh because I could never figure those things out. They made those things so utterly complicated by trying to make them simple. But if you happen to want to use the technology, just know how to use it before you get in there so you're not wasting people's time. Ground rules. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about ground rules in a little bit, but if you decide to use ground rules, are they established and are they communicated? And a scribe, I was kind of hesitant on even including this whole topic of a scribe because I have some opinions about it. A lot of people may say having a scribe for a meeting is absolutely crucial and you always have to have it. I think that it's a great idea for some meetings, it's a very bad idea for other meetings because it wastes time and it wastes energy. And if you're sending out the meeting notes for a meeting that hardly anybody's going to read, you're just wasting time. But if you do plan on using a scribe, make sure the scribe is assigned and people know what to expect. Okay, the fourth deadly sin of ineffective meetings is discussion is dominated by 2 or 3 people. This is similar to what we just saw in a little video there. Everybody that you're inviting for a reason. Let them have their turn, unless you're very particular about, you're just here just to listen in, just to gain information, perfectly fine. Just make sure that that's recognized up front. So everybody who's present is there for a reason. You need to make sure that they understand that their opinions matter, their voice matters. So being inclusive in meetings is very important. And the first part of that, this concept of psychological safety, it's a term that's thrown around a lot, and I think it is understated, unfortunately, a lot of times, because I think psychological safety is absolutely fundamental and paramount, not just to effective meetings, but to any kind of an effective team. Having the psychological safety is critical, making it very clear up front and making it very understood. Everybody is welcome, everybody's opinions matter, everybody is welcome to participate, and you have a responsibility to share your thoughts on things. As long as people have that deliberate understanding, you've taken that first major step in psychological safety. There are times where it is absolutely appropriate to interrupt the dominators, refocus the discussion, and or put things on the parking lot that we'll see in just a minute. You have my permission to do so. If you feel uncomfortable doing it, just say, Tim gave me permission to do so. Interrupt the dominators respectfully and appropriately, but just refocus the conversation. You're not doing yourself or anybody in the meeting a service unless you take control of the meeting. So going down a rabbit hole, cut it off. If you have an agenda item that you plan on spending a certain amount of time and you've decided deliberately not to spend more time on that, great, cut it off, put it on the parking lot, move on. If you do plan on spending more time on it, great, make a deliberate decision, make it known to everybody that you're adjusting the agenda, and then move on. Amplify voices. Everybody who's in there has a voice, they have an opinion. We already talked about that, but there are people who may not either feel comfortable speaking up or they just happen to be the kind of people that like to listen more than they talk. I've been accused of that before. I don't consider myself a shy person, but if I'm in a meeting, I tend to listen a lot more than I'm talking. One of the reasons is there are meetings where sometimes I have to interrupt just to get my voice out there. I absolutely hate being interrupted and I hate interrupting. So there are times where I tend to just kind of listen and keep on listening. A meeting facilitator who's being very artful and being very deliberate and being very effective recognizes the people who are not speaking as much and inviting them appropriately to share their thoughts, share their opinions. And then lastly, encouraging different ideas and opinions. We're talking about this, I think, in a little bit. But if you have harmony all the time in every meeting, you're probably not getting the most out of your meetings. Allowing and encouraging differing ideas and opinions is a great technique. If you happen to be in a meeting, 12 people, and everybody agrees on a decision, you're feeling good, you're writing that decision down. As a meeting facilitator, my suggestion to you is challenge it a little bit. Ask a question like, as long as there's time, ask a question like, what's the worst thing that can happen with this? What's a reason why we should not do this? If you were to decide on a different course of action, what would that be? Just throw out and invite people to challenge the idea and opinion that we're making the decision. Okay, the fifth deadly sin of ineffective meetings, everybody being distracted. Multitasking, I'm sure everybody in this meeting has recognized this before. Multitasking is a myth. Either you're paying attention or you're not paying attention. The human brain can only focus on one thing effectively at a time. And if you're in a meeting, you're there for a reason, and everybody needs to recognize that. So distractions is something you want to prevent. As part of the ground rules, if you happen to have a culture and or a meeting where you want to set ground rules, first thing, laptops closed, phones out of the way. That's just a thing to do. I've been in meetings before. I'm thinking, I was planning on getting things done during this meeting because this is one of those meetings where only 10% of it's important to me. But I'm always thankful that I put that aside and I'm focusing on the meeting. And this goes back to agenda as well. Artfully prepare that agenda so that everybody knows and is interested in what we're talking about, and they can recognize their value and they can make that connection between everything that's happening in that agenda. And this is a fun one. Encourage people to stand up if they're sleepy. I'm bad at this, by the way, especially in those 1 o'clock meetings right after lunch. You know, you got all those carbs and you're sitting there and the old nap monster decides to start getting at you and you start seeing these. Yeah, I do that often. In fact, I was in a meeting a couple of years ago. It was a board meeting, and the CEO was there, and we were giving a presentation, and I saw the CEO being napped by the nap monster. And to his credit, he immediately recognized it. And he stood up and took the rest of the conversation from a standing position, and he was engaged, and he was great. I think more people need to do that. Just stand up if you're sleepy and encourage people to do so. Make it known that they're invited to do so. And if you're one of these people that has those 2-hour meetings and you're not putting a break in there, I say straight to purgatory with you. Every single meeting that's 2 hours or more absolutely needs a break. I even like to put breaks in 90-minute meetings. That's just me. But just put a break in there. I know it's tough to corral everybody after break. I get that, but include a break. Give your mind a sense of different things to focus on. Okay, our sixth deadly sin of ineffective meetings is starting late and ending late. Respect everybody's time. Now, when you say you're going to start at a particular time, the best practice is to be prepared to start at that time. You don't necessarily have to start at that time. Just like we started a little bit late because we were expecting a certain number of participants and we decided to go ahead and keep going. We were prepared to start at the right time. So I highly recommend that. And then be artful about when to really get started with the meeting, but just plan for that in your agenda. And the one that you do have more control over is when you're going to end the meeting. The pro tip here, plan it. Please plan it. Put it in the agenda. All of us are probably the busy executives that we all are. We have back-to-back meetings all the time. And if you're running late on one meeting, you're not just being disrespectful for the people in that meeting, but all of those other meetings that they're expecting those people at, you're being disrespectful to them as well. So please, please end your meetings on time and be artful about how to do that. Seventh and last one that we're going to be talking about today, wrap up. This is at the very end. Even if you were to have the most ineffective meeting, it went completely off the rails, there was conflict everywhere and people were just not engaged. If you do a good solid wrap up, maybe you'll get a D and not an F. But wrapping up properly, everybody has a different opinion or a different interpretation about what happened in the meeting. If you wrap up properly, people know what happened in that meeting. And here's some of the things, very, very basic. It can take 30 seconds, just do it and move on. A brief summary of the agenda that you actually went through, not what you plan to go through, but what you actually talked about. The decisions that were made. This is an important one. We decided to do X, Y, and Z, and these three people were going to do it, and they were going to get the follow-ups by these dates. Same thing with action items. Here's some of the things that we agreed to do. We're going to take this away. We're going to get this done by this time, and here are the people who are being accountable for that. List of parking lot items. This is a fun one. We talked about the agenda topics that end up being a lot bigger than we anticipated. When you're artfully cutting that off, put it on the parking lot so that people know we need to have a conversation around this topic. And here's our next steps for those parking lot items. And then lastly, and I would say just hugely important, thank everybody for being a part of the meeting. They gave you one of the biggest gifts that they can give you, their time. So just say thank you for your participation, and that's how you end the meeting. It's very, very important to do that. Okay, so those were the 7 sins, and I hope you got something out of that. And I can only imagine that as we went through these, you were probably thinking, yeah, I can really resonate with that one. Not so much that one, but that one is really, really important for me. So a question to all of you, here's a poll that we're going to kick off here. Which one of these were more important or resonated with you than others? Which one would you say is the most relevant for your meetings that you've been at? Greg mentioned earlier the lack of purpose and agenda and things like that. I mentioned that for me, a pet peeve is the starting late and ending late. So which one for you are more prescient than others? And while we're getting the results on that, I'm kind of curious. If there is one sin, one meeting sin that was not mentioned here, that you're thinking to yourself, oh, wow, I'm surprised Tim didn't mention this one or this pet peeve that I have. Raise your hand and tell me what's an 8th sin, an 8th meeting sin that you would add to this list. I'd be really curious, and maybe I'll replace one of these sins if it's a really good one. Anybody have any good sins that they would add to this list? So I hit the mark. That's good. Okay, so the poll here, what do we have? We got 1, lack of purpose. We have distraction. We had starting a meeting late. Oh, good. So people resonated and agreed with me as well. We had 2 on starting a meeting late. We had 1 almost distracted. Another one on lack of purpose. Okay. And we had another one down here for wrap up. Oh yeah, I hear you about that one. Yeah, for me, I'd say it's purpose and starting a meeting late. That's just a pet peeve of mine. Not sure why it's so critical for me, but that's just something that I've always had, that I'd like to respect people's time. Hey, that's just me. Okay, so with that, now I want to take it a little bit of a different direction around the organization of this content. So we talked about each of the 7 sins. We looked at some of the tips. Now let's organize it a little bit differently and look at before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. Okay, so first, before the meeting, what things you can do? Talk about purpose, being very clear. Why are we having the meeting? What's this whole reason to spend people's time in this forum? The goal, what do I want to get out of it? That's the end state. That's the definition of success. Having that agenda, even if it's basic, even if it's nothing more than we're going to have an introduction, we're going to talk about this topic for 15 minutes, we're going to make a closure, and then we're going to get out of there. Just very, very basic, just understanding what that is and sticking to it. And being very intentional about your participants. We talked about using the required line, that optional line. I love doing that because it is very clear to people, I really want you at this meeting, or you're just invited to this meeting. Being very deliberate about that. Thinking ahead and planning properly, testing out the technology, making sure that the pre-reads are prepared properly, sent out, the expectations are set properly, making sure that people understand what to expect out of this meeting. And then during the meeting, some of the tips that we talked about, respecting everybody's time, starting, ending on time, and sticking with the agenda, but allowing some flexibility. Again, this is not like being the time Nazi that we saw earlier. If you want to spend more time on one subject, great. If you want to take a particular subject and move it out, great. That's completely fine. Just allowing for that flexibility and avoiding those rabbit holes, and being very deliberate. If you're going to go down them, fine, time box it. Be deliberate about it. Make sure everybody recognizes why you're doing it. Have that action item log so that you know when and how to take that offline and deal with it later. Be inclusive, engage everybody. Everybody's voice needs to be heard. If they're in the meeting for a purpose, they're not just there just to stare at the PowerPoint and listen. Make sure everybody's voice is heard. Continuously build on that psychological safety. We talked about the most valuable thing up front. Remember, we talked about that. Psychological safety is not harmony. That's one of the things that a lot of people misunderstand a lot of times. Psychological safety doesn't mean that I'm being protected against things. It means I have the ability to participate in the conversation without negative repercussions. Don't avoid those tough subjects. You have the elephant in the room, talk about it. It's important. Conflict is important to address. We're going to talk about that one in a minute. And a proper wrap up. We talked about making sure everybody is clear and everybody agrees on the decisions, the action items, the next steps. and then always close out with a thank you. So conflict. Let's talk about conflict real quick. As I mentioned, highly important that we don't skip over the conflict. It's always good to have it as long as it's constructive. So first off, you're a meeting facilitator. Conflict is happening. You're either part of it or you're witnessing it. First off, recognize and make sure everybody's clear that we're on the same team. We all have the same goals. We may disagree on how to get to the goal. We may even disagree on the definition of the goal, but just being very clear that we're on the same team. We're trying to win together. So keep that as a forefront of your mind. Sticking to the facts. A lot of times there may be differing opinions of what the facts are. Getting to the proper understanding about the facts and then keeping to that is a really great way to focus the conflict in a pretty constructive way. Then, of course, don't make it personal. If you or one of your participants happens to start going down that path, cut it off immediately. Refocus in the appropriate way. You don't have to slam the person or the conversation. Just make sure that it can be refocused. We're talking about this topic here. We're talking about this particular agreement that we're trying to make. Whatever it is, just make sure that you get it back on track. And being humble. A lot of us, we probably recognize humility is not thinking less of ourselves, it's thinking of ourselves less and thinking of others more. If you're engaged in conflict, if you're trying to mediate conflict in the meeting, put on that thick skin, get in there, get right in the middle of it. Don't be afraid, take the hits, dish them out. Just keep that humility on your side, so that the other person knows that their opinions and values matter. Okay, and then after the meeting, there's some things that you could truly do to make a very effective wrap up and a very effective post-meeting engagement. Send out notes, most importantly on the decisions made, the action items assigned. As I mentioned, I have opinions about comprehensive meeting notes. Sometimes it's worthwhile, usually not, because hardly anybody reads them, but it's very important about decisions and action items. And if you do have conflict, most of the time that conflict happens, at least in my experience, it doesn't necessarily always get resolved in the meeting. It may conclude sometimes on its own, usually not. If there's conflict, go afterwards to the participants and who are engaged in this. Hey, I know that was a kind of a tough conversation for you. What do you think about that? Or what do you plan on doing as the next step? Or is there any help that you need in order to think through this? Or whatever that is, just don't let the conflict die just because it came to a particular resolution in the meeting. Follow up. We talked about action items. We talked about decisions. Always follow up. Just letting them out there and not following up, that is not being accountable to you or to your organization. Always follow up. And then lastly, ask for meeting feedback, how to make the meeting better. In my last organization, I got into the rut where I'm sure all of us who have a staff get into these ruts. I had a weekly staff meeting that lasted an hour, and we would talk about important things, but over a very brief period of time, it got into the same old thing where it's everybody gave their status update. And they had their 5 minutes and said, this is what I'm working on. And everybody else was kind of zoning out. And, it's important stuff, but it's not the right time. It's not the right venue for that kind of a conversation. So about once every month and once every 2 months, I tried to introduce, even in the meeting agenda, I would close out with, hey folks, what can we do to make this meeting better? If you were running this meeting, what would you do? How can we change this to be more valuable to everybody? And there are times where, for example, I would take that 1 hour meeting, shrink it down to 30 minutes and focus everybody. What are your top 3 things that you're working on? Or what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that you need from everybody else in this meeting? Or what's one thing that you think that we can do better in this meeting? And then the next 30 minutes would be, I don't know, a guest speaker or something like that, or we focus on a particular topic that's external to the order of the day. So just a pro tip, think about that on how to make your meetings better. Okay, now let's wrap up here. This is our wrap up, by the way. So here are the key takeaways. The 7 deadly sins of ineffective meetings. We talked about lack of purpose. We talked about a missing agenda. We talked about not being prepared. We talked about the discussion being dominated by 2 or 3 people. We talked about people being distracted, starting late, ending late, and no wrap up. The 7 deadly sins. And we also talked about some solutions to counteract these sins and get you out of purgatory and going straight into the paradise that we'd like to be in. Meeting paradise? I don't know, that doesn't sound right. So before the meeting, purpose, goal, agenda, deliberate thought and action on the right participants, and then thinking ahead and making sure you're prepared. During the meeting, being aware of the time, like even right now, I'm looking at here as 2:44. Okay, I'm doing okay on time here. Stick to the agenda, but don't be constrained by it. Just be very deliberate about how you're planning to stick to or deviate from the agenda, and make it clear to the participants. If you're making a decision to deviate, just make sure they're aware of that. Use an action item log. Every meeting should have an action item log. Be inclusive in everybody, make sure that their voices are heard. Psychological safety is that foundation that allows for trust, allows for vulnerability, allows for those tough conversations to happen constructively. Psychological safety. And always have a wrap up. And then after the meeting, send out those notes, follow up with people that need to be, that you need to have those conversations with, whether it be one-on-one or otherwise. Handle conflict, don't let it just die there, follow up on that conflict. Ask for feedback, it's always good. Just like right after this meeting, our crack producer, JP, who's been a wonderful, wonderful help on this. Right after this, I'm gonna go up to him and say, hey, JP, what could I have done better? So always ask for that feedback, it's really important. Okay, as we conclude on this topic here, before we have the closure for this this conversation, I'd like to open it up and for any questions, any thoughts, any suggestions on things that we should include in this or other sins that have been prescient for you. Any questions from anybody in the audience? And by the way, I have not been monitoring the chat, so I'm going to take a look at that as well. So what questions might be out there? Parking lot is a necessary item, absolutely. Oh, let's see. Makatuso had a send here. Turning a meeting that should be 10 minutes into 30 minutes. I love that one. Just because you have the time blocked up, be right. Oh, that's great. Be bright, be brief, be gone. Ooh, I like that one. I may have heard that one from somebody before. That's a really good one. Not allowing for input and feedback. Okay. Being the only one talking in a meeting. Oh my gosh. If you're a meeting facilitator and you're doing like 90% of the talking, that should be a tip. Probably not doing the right things. Meetings go way past the deadline. Good topics in here. Great topics. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of your input. And let's see, we have a hand raised here from Mr. Greg. Let's see, asked to unmute. Greg, you're able to unmute?
Yep.
Oh, there you go.
So what did you say? I mean, there's always the meetings where, you know, one or two people or two or three people are trying to take over the meeting, right? And just get they're very opinionated. They want to get their ideas, you know, across, and it may squash, you know, somebody else on the team that's not able to speak up. What did you say were some tips to kind of move that along?
Yeah, for me, number
Thank
one.
you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Greg. I really appreciate it. That's a really good thing. The discussion being dominated by two or three people is the question. And the way that I've always done it, I take the role of the meeting facilitator very, I was about to say seriously, but very carefully. Maybe that's the right phrasing. Meaning I allow myself that ability to interrupt. As I mentioned, I hate interrupting people, but if that's happening, even if they're trying to be forceful, even if they're interrupting me, I say, you know what, I got it. I'm recognizing what you said is, what your opinion is, what your idea is, and why it's so strong. I got it. Yeah, we're writing that down, recognize, okay, we're going to let other people talk now. Just being very deliberate like that. For me, it sounds rude. It sounds highly distracting, but that's how I've done it before. Any other questions that are out there? Oh, Marissa had a question on icebreakers. Oh yeah. My feelings on icebreakers. When appropriate, absolutely, I love them. They're a good way to get people engaged. Like right at the very beginning of this meeting, I asked people where they're from. That was first off my literal curiosity, but allows people to understand how to be engaged in the meeting, the option and the permission to be engaged in the meeting. For ones that take more time, like the little get out of your seat and, you know, I don't know, jump around or whatever those activities are. If it's the right kind of context, if the purpose behind the icebreaker is to get people engaged, to get people up and moving in interacting, wonderful idea. I'm doing a workshop in a couple of weeks. It's gonna be a 4-hour workshop. The first 30 minutes of that workshop is going to be an icebreaker kind of activity. And so it's very, very intentional. But you know, if it's nothing more than, okay, why did we just spend 10 minutes doing this exercise? It means nothing relative to what we're doing. So when used properly, fully on board with them, love them. So thank you for the question, Bruce. All righty. Right after this meeting, by the way, JP is going to be sending out a link to this recording, as we mentioned, as well as a follow-up checklist and a summary of all of the things that we talked about here as a takeaway. And by all means, please feel free to share with anybody and everybody that you think could be could benefit from this topic here, because we want to make sure that meetings are optimized and outstanding meetings for everybody. Okay, lastly, if you're interested in learning more, www.turknet.com. There's me there. I'm the VP of Leadership Development. Our fearless leader, his name is Tino Mantella. He's the president and CEO of Turknet. As I mentioned, we've been around for a while. We'd love to talk to you, just to have a conversation. We're nice folks here. We love talking to people. By the way, the content that we went over here is part of a program that we just recently put together called Manager to Leader. It's all about taking people who are junior in their management journey and making sure they understand how to be leaders. So talk to us about that if you're interested. And hey, look at that. We are ending early. Wow, I'm going to put that in the win column for me today. So thank you all very much for participating and really appreciate it. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, comments, or anything that you want to mention about this. And I thank you for your time. Hope you have a wonderful day. If you're here in the greater Atlanta area, enjoy this wonderful fall weather. And I will be anxious to talk to you next time. Have a great day, everybody.